Bob?
If just normal circumstances, when you retire, then your spouse can withdraw half your benefit. So if under Social Security you're getting $1,000 a month, your spouse is going to automatically get $500, so the family gets $1,500. The spouse at the same time can get.
You mean if your spouse, and forgive my ignorance, because I hadn't paid a whole lot of attention to Social Security, but and I don't have a whole lot of faith in it anyway, but which is another story. But
yeah.
So if my spouse never worked, never contributed to Social Security, I work all my life, I retire with a $1,000 a month benefit, then they can just up and draw $500
correct.
Or
if
up to half of that.
Once they're eligible age, that's correct.
That's pretty sweet, isn't it? No wonder the country's
nice.
broke.
If your spouse works, then he or she gets the greater of half your benefit or his or her own benefit.
Okay, so, but if you have an independent pension, like what we're talking about here, then instead of being able to draw half of it, you can only draw 2/3 of it, or 2/3 of half?
Well, 2/3 of half. What happens, unfortunately, and it's not quite that easy because of a lot of formulas, but the bottom line, not to get bogged down too much in detail, is because the town elected in 1984 not to join Social Security, the assumption at that time, just a little background, the assumption at that time was that those entities that make that decision would implement a defined benefit plan. That was the assumption. And consequently, to prevent a windfall, and the way the windfall occurs is the person works in outside employment. So I'm at the town of Farragut, and after hours I work wherever, and I think that has to be approved, or I work somewhere else and come here and I've got some kind of Social Security benefit. Well, the government said, okay, you can opt out of Social Security, but if you do so, any Social Security benefit you earn is going to be reduced. And the reduction for the individual, it is about $350 to $400 per month. On top of that,
about 40%. Is that the?
It drops. You read it. That's good. Mm-hmm. It drops from 90% to 40%. So the first, it's a three-tier component under Social Security. That's X percent, 90%. The first $700 and something, and then it goes to another percent. That first component drops from 90% to 40%. So it's 50%. I believe it's 767, I think, comes to mind, but it's about $350, $360 a month reduction. In addition to that, the spousal benefit will be reduced as well. So it's just an unfortunate component tied to the decision that was made. So ideally that law would go away. It would make things easier, but here we are. So.
Okay, well, if I understand it right, and I've been trying to understand it right.
Yeah, it's complicated.
But so if you have a pension here at town, and what I'm hearing is that currently employees retiring from town are only going to be able to get about 34% of their current salary at retirement. And I think a big part of that is because they didn't contribute their half, which would be mandated under Social Security. It's going to be taken out of your payroll. You don't get to decide that. So they got that benefit going along. They've had that 6% they've been putting in their pocket all along and chose not to contribute to their retirement. That's another story. But so you're saying that based on that, they're only going to get 34.2%, but they also get 40% of the Social Security they'd have if they worked someplace else before they came here, plus 2/3 of half of that Social Security benefit as a spousal benefit. So that's not 34.2%. It sounds like really, realistically, it's probably significantly more than that.
And, of course, that would be, I don't know what significant would be. If the individual has worked anywhere and gotten Social Security benefit, then there would be some additional benefit, obviously, that would be paid. On the other hand, if a person's, and that's what makes it complicated, there's not going to be a real consistency. So an individual, for example, could work here 30 years and have very little Social Security or no Social Security benefit. In that case, the number would hold up. On the other hand, the person could work after hours, maybe it's $6,000 or $7,000 a year, what have you, doing something and get some nominal Social Security benefit, but that's going to be reduced. it's impossible. A person could work for Social Security or with Social Security coverage for 20 years, 25 years, come to work for the town of Farragut, and that benefit would be different, but that 20, 25-year Social Security benefit is going to be reduced just by the decision that was made to come to work at the town of Farragut. That's the unfortunate part of it. That law is really draconian. Yes. Correct. With no mandatory employee contribution. Yeah. So.
To exempt us from that penalty, basically.
Yeah, and basically what I'm suggesting here has nothing to do with which option you choose. If you choose the committee option, or whether you choose, you really ought to see if you can get some relief from a decision really not made for advisement back in '84. I completely about that. They make
I may be cross, but I'm not gross. So. No problem.
Okay, somebody else.
Mayor, I have a couple of employees and another citizen that would like to speak when they have a moment.
Mr. Mayor, while he's coming to the podium, may I make a correction? Sure. There's one point that Mr. Cross and Ms. Curry made that is not quite correct. If an employee retires under the Railroad Security Act or with a government pension, they cannot draw on their spouse's contributions to Social Security. None. Zero. And if they have earned Social Security on their own, they can draw their Social Security with the reduction. He was correct in that.
Good evening. My name is Jack Glover, and I am, unlike my neighbor across the road here, I am a active financial advisor, and I have spent 30 years in the banking business, mortgage insurance business, and also in the M&A side. And basically, the issue that I have is trusting, having faith, or whatever, in what I think the very real possibility, because there are so many variables that exist, of creating an unfunded liability that somewhere down the road, 15, 20 years from now, as you had indicated, that there's a liability for that somebody's got to go ahead and pay for, and the person who's going to have to pay for that is the taxpayer. And, I mean, all you have to do, and I'm not trying to paint the defined benefit program with the same brush here, but the Social Security program, as we mentioned, the prescription drug program, the Medicare program, the unfunded liabilities right there. I don't know whether anybody's ever looked at the debt clock or anything on the Google search, but that totals about $108 trillion, which is 10 times what the gross domestic product is. Now, there's lots of reasons why that happened, but by the same token, most companies over the past 15, 20 years, and I was part of a large corporation itself, went away from the defined benefit program simply because of the funding issues, because of the service issues, because of the uncertainty of everything, went to things like cash balance plans and other things like that. And while we recognize that this is an unfortunate situation, and it's been acknowledged, I think, time and again, we're not going to correct this thing all in one fell swoop. I think it's right to go ahead and supplement it I think the Social Security proposal is probably a step in that right direction, but I am tremendously and vehemently against a defined benefit plan for the future that I don't have anybody sitting here who is going to be able to define for me and go ahead and assure me that there's not going to be an unfunded liability that's going to be created out of this process, because the history of it is so uncertain, and the things that have happened in the past decade, let alone the things we face going forward, which are more serious problems, are going to be able to take care of itself. So thank you for your time.
You know, if I may, another comment I'd like to make, and there's a couple of experts in the room, so if I misspeak, feel free to correct me. But I've already stated what I would propose and which option I would go with. I think it's good to keep in mind. We've talked about the problems that can come from the DB plan. You know, let's assume, just worst case scenario, that Social Security would blow up on us in 5-10 years. We would still have flexibility to change what the town would match, what we would give to employees. We still have the ability, whether it's this board or a future board, to do some things differently. It's no different than in private business. However, it then you pay for it when you have the money, versus having an unfunded obligation, and that happens all the time in the private sector. If you keep up with what's happened over the last few years, there has been a large percentage, I would argue perhaps 30%, maybe it's as high as 50%, I don't dig into that detail, of small and large corporations that suspended any contribution due to the financial difficulty they had. And although the town of Farragut enjoys, relatively speaking, pretty solid financial setting today, that day may not always be here. So there may be a year when the town has to say, we can't do the match. But also, again, if Social Security would go south or go away, the town could always up what they do. They could put in a one-time contribution, or they could change the level of match that they chose to give at any given level. So I think that's important. You know, I think sometimes people get concerned about flexibility, but I will tell you that, again, unless these experts in the room tell me I'm incorrect, I believe it's important to understand that you still have a tremendous amount of flexibility with going with the Social Security and the 401, I guess it was A plan if I recall. Forgive me, I want to say K plan all the time. Versus the potential lack of flexibility if we would end up with an unfunded liability in the future. You know, again, as it's been stated many times, it is very unfortunate we're at where we are today. The good news is, though, regardless of what happens, we are taking a step forward. And it's a pretty significant step from where we're at this point in time. So.
While Mr. Whiting's come to the podium, Ms. Curry and the other experts in the room, as an employer for many years, I realized that there is, in Social Security, you have the 6.2%